Trump had this surprise visit to Iraq today, as we mentioned, and he said he's not in any hurry to name a new defense chief and that the acting defense secretary could be there for, quote, a long time. Trump's Iraq visit comes after booting, of course, Secretary Mattis 2 months early. He had quit in protest over Trump's policies, including, reportedly, Syria. Now, there's this quote here of Trump saying, I think a lot of people are going to come around to my way of thinking on that issue. Mattis out early. Trump grew, quote, increasingly angry with the criticism over all of this on TV. Mattis had written this letter warning of storm clouds looming. Meanwhile, here's Trump today.
If they want us to do the fighting, they also have to pay a price. So we're not the suckers of the world. We're no longer the suckers, folks. And people aren't looking at us as suckers. We're respected again as a nation.
I'm joined now by, as promised, William Cohen, former Defense Secretary under President Clinton, and Congressman Anthony Brown, a Democrat from Maryland, also an Iraq War veteran. My thanks to both of you. Secretary Cohen, I want to begin with you, obviously, given your deep experience here. And for our viewers, I want to play a little bit of the history, your address when you were sworn in to this same post 2 decades ago.
American leadership remains essential to defend our global interests and to maintain our nation's indispensable role as the world's greatest force for peace, prosperity, and freedom. The American people have entrusted us with the care of the nation's greatest treasure, the lives of our young men and women.
That's how you approach the post. I wonder your views tonight, now that we've had a little bit of time to digest Secretary Mattis's departure, his concerns over Syria policy, and the larger point we've been discussing at the Pentagon and elsewhere, which is whether it's good for the federal government to have so many acting officers for so long.
Well, the president has shown disrespect for his military advisors. Disrespect for the FBI, for his entire intelligence community, for the Justice Department. So there's no lack of disrespect on his part, the demonstration of it. As a result of that, you're having these positions which are going unfilled because the president feels that he knows more than anyone else and that he now feels free and liberated to make decisions without the benefit of having some wiser shoulders and sources around him.
And does it concern you, the what appears to be, according to Mattis and others, a kind of a breakdown of the process? You don't have to be, I think, a foreign policy expert to know there are plenty of folks who might be sympathetic to a goal of drawing down troops in Syria, depending on how it's done, but are very concerned that so many of your former colleagues, so many experts say there's not really a responsible process in place under this president.
There's both the timing and the way in which it was done. The timing was curious because the president had suffered a very bad week. Number one, he had his former national security advisor be lectured by a sitting federal judge accusing him of betraying the country. Then we had the dissolution ordered by New York authorities of the Trump Foundation. And then we had the resignation by his Secretary of Defense. So all of that comes at one time. And so I think the way in which it was done, namely, it was very impromptu. There was no interagency process. There was no forewarning to our allies, those who are committed to the fight against ISIS. There was no sharing of the information with the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. As such, he was not involved in the decision-making, as far as I know. And so it was a decision made in the wake of all of the bad news. And I think the president said, look, I've been saying this, I'm going to do it now. I don't care what others think about it. I don't care what the allies think. And I think that's a very destructive and unpresidential thing to do something by impetuosity, to respond without thinking it through in terms of the timing. There's a legitimate discussion to be had about whether we should be there for how long. But the way in which you downsize, the way in which you remove our troops over a period of time to allow for their safety and for the safety of those they leave behind, not to mention the betrayal of the Kurds who are left behind to fend for themselves against the Russians, against the Iranians, and against the Turks. That's what's irresponsible about this decision, not whether or not we should eventually come out, but how we come out and when we come out and the manner in which the decision is made. Those are very troubling.
Congressman?
Yeah, look, I'm troubled as well. You don't have to be an expert in foreign policy to know that the process stinks. It appears as if the president was on the telephone with the president of Turkey, who said, hey, I've got this. And the President Trump, decided that we would completely withdraw troops in Syria. There's no evidence that the president considered options, that he understands the ramifications. I have a lot of questions. Number one, if you say that ISIS is defeated, what's the criteria that you base that on? Number two, given the work that has gone into having our partners pay for many of the essential services that go to the towns and cities in Syria that have been wreaked by war, are our partners going to continue to pay for those essential services? What about the continuation of U.S. airstrikes, which have contributed to a lot of the destruction in Syria? A lot of unanswered questions. The process simply stinks.
Congressman, given what Secretary Cohen just laid out on the Syria issue and what many people remember in the election, midterm election timed deployment of troops to the border regarding the so-called caravan, are you concerned that this president may be using the troops for political purposes?
I'm very concerned about that, and I think troops also are concerned, and that's why the president's approval ratings among active duty military is at an all-time low. The president has talked about using the military for a nationwide parade in the nation's capital, sending troops to the southwest border when there isn't a real threat, not the kinds of threats that you see in Afghanistan or Syria. And so troops get it. They're knowledgeable. They have access to information. But for the recent visit with the First Lady and the President in Iraq today, he had gone nearly 2 years without visiting troops in a combat zone. So there's a real disconnect between this commander-in-chief and the men and women who raised their right hand to serve our country.
Well, both of you have that distinction, and we wanted to listen and learn from both of you as these serious and profound questions are raised about both the process and the outcomes, particularly in the Middle East. So Secretary Cohen and Congressman Brown, thanks to both of you. Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.